Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you another round of science fiction and fantasy books. And as always, I have a good collection here, mostly science fiction, but I'm very excited to talk about a book that has been on my TBR for so long and a series that I have finally conquered. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's start with science fiction, as we like to do here, and I read Fuzzy Nation by John Scalzi. This follows an independent contractor that works for a company that extracts resources from different planets, and so his job is to go in and find those resources and then report back. However, on one planet he finds some amazing resources, but the catch is that he also discovers this creature called the Fuzzy. He actually discovers several of them, and he notices that they appear to be very intelligent. He brings in the help of a friend who's more familiar with xeno animals, and they go on to possibly realize that these creatures might actually be sentient. And so it ends up in a court battle where they have to fight for the rights of these fuzzies in order to protect them and their environment, because if this corporation does come in, it's going to ravage the planet, take away all the resources, and essentially kill them off. Now, given that premise, you can tell that this book deals with some heavy themes and ideas involving environmentalism and corporate greed and all of that. But for the most part, this book is really fun and entertaining. There's a lot of good humor, as you will come to expect from John Scalzi if you haven't read him before. And the book is relatively short, but while it definitely starts out lighter, it does get to some darker moments, so be prepared for that. Overall, really enjoyed this one. My favorite aspect was, of course, the fuzzies, who were adorable. There's just some really cute things that they do, but at the same time, I really enjoyed the legal court case and just the proceedings around that. It does really bring in some legal concepts, and I thought those were super fascinating, and it just made me think that I need to find more science fiction books that involve legal cases. So if you know of any, or maybe fantasy legal cases, I would love to hear your recommendations down below. Highly recommend this one. Super cute, super entertaining, and I did the audiobook version, which is narrated by Will Wheaton. Highly recommend. Next, we have You Sexy Thing by Rambo, which is a book involving a group of ex-military officers that go off to form their own space restaurant. However, something happens and they have to go and fight for their restaurant, and crazy things ensue. This is a book that, I'll be honest, is pretty light on plot, but what it makes up for is the fact that it has really fun characters, really diverse aliens, and it's just overall really entertaining. Given that premise, you don't take it too seriously. The stakes aren't really that epic, and a lot of this book involves more about restaurateuring, so conversations about preparing meals and all of that. I thought it was fun, but not the most memorable. If anything, I would compare this book to something like A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. So if you enjoy books that are kind of, again, lighter on plot, but have those elements of an optimistic future, really easy to understand, very little to literally no hard science, this is very approachable, perfect for beginners. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun. So if you like books along the lines of something like the Wayfarer series, this one might be one you want to check out. Next up, we have Crashing Heaven by Al Robertson, and this follows a man who has just been released from prison, and he is going off to find the lady that he was corresponding with. However, when he wrote to her saying that he was getting out of prison, she stopped responding back, and so he's going to investigate what is going on. This is actually a piece of cyberpunk, which is a genre that I have pretty much said in the past that is not for me. I've tried a few books, including, of course, the iconic Neuromancer, and I just was of the impression that I could not enjoy a cyberpunk book. But this book proved me wrong. I thought it was very approachable, very easy to get into, and for the most part, I really enjoyed it. The cyberpunk aspects come in a few different ways, but specifically in this one, you get a focus where people have implants. And so this man particularly has implants that connect him with what is almost called a puppet. And so he has this artificial intelligence that is connected to him, that works with him, and they're really behaving often as one person. And what I really enjoyed about this book was the humor of that puppet, because he's constantly narrating and chatting back with the protagonist as he is doing things, commenting on it, kind of making fun of him along the way. And I thought that was just really entertaining to have that back and forth and commentary along the way. Compared to other cyberpunk books, I thought this one was a lot more approachable. Certainly it's not a book for beginners, but compared to other cyberpunk books, I think that this one is much more character focused, which is probably why I enjoyed it more. And while while it still had those hard concepts of cyberpunk, I felt like you didn't necessarily need to visualize them fully or fully understand them in order to follow the story, because again, the story itself had a fairly simple, straightforward premise and a plot that was quite easy to follow. So if you were totally turned off by Neuromancer and are just looking for a more approachable place to start with cyberpunk, this would be my recommendation. I thought it was really easy to get into, really easy to fly through. It's standalone, or at least I read it as one. I think there's a sequel, but my library doesn't have it. So very easy to consume, and I would recommend it. Next we have The Risen Empire and The Killing of Worlds, both by Scott Westerfeld. This is the 2 books in the Secession duology, and this is a story set in a far-flung future where there are 2 warring nations or bodies that rule the galaxy. And so on one side you have this ancient empire that has become so powerful through finding a way to create immortality through death, and so it is led by this old emperor who is almost like a lich, or someone you could picture like the emperor from Star Wars. And then on the other side you have these people called the Ricks that are obsessed with artificial intelligence. They create these compound minds and almost treat them like gods, and so they are obsessed with utilizing this technology. And these 2 sides have very, very different ideologies, and so they are constantly at war, fighting against each other for territory and all of that. The first book starts out with the kidnapping of a young child from the Immortality dynasty, and so she is actually the heir to the throne, and she is stolen away. And so the story kicks off in full force right into the action with them trying to then save and rescue this young princess. And this book in a way has a Star Wars feel because you get that galactic empire, but I also want to caution you that this is not a book for beginners. This book is really dense. It has some amazing world building, as I attempted to explain, but it is not the simplest book to read, and you really have to pay attention to the details in order to catch everything. If I had a complaint, it's the fact that especially in the first book, I felt like the character development was a bit lacking. I didn't really find myself attached to the characters. It did get a lot better in book 2. And as I mentioned, this is a duology, so the nice thing is you get in, you get out without having, say, a 9-book series like The Expanse, which I love, but I understand it's long. So if you're looking for a shorter series to read, this one is great. It's complete and was very satisfying. I, again, adored the world building. I thought it was fascinating. It's definitely one I want to reread because while I enjoyed it so much, I'll be honest, it's definitely one I want to revisit because there was so much packed into these short little books that I know I didn't catch everything I wanted to on the first pass, and I would love to revisit it. So highly recommend if you're looking for more of a hidden gem. This one feels so underhyped. I never see people talk about it. Oh, and I should mention, yes, that is the same author who wrote all of those YA dystopians that are oh so popular. He wrote these before then, and I think they just didn't perform well because it's hard to get into the market as a science fiction author. And so I think he found success in YA, but these books are definitely adult. Ignore any marketing you see otherwise. So I really recommend them. I can't wait to go back to these worlds. Next up, we have The Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov. And this, of course, is the first book in the Robot Detective series that follows after the short story collection of I, Robot. And this follows a man who is a police officer or detective in this future, and he is set to investigate and solve this murder. However, he needs to work with a spacer in order to do that, and he finds out that the spacer that is assigned to him, because this main detective is from Earth, is not actually a human, but instead a robot. And so this book, of course, ties in with I, Robot because it involves the laws of robotics and takes place in that same future. And so a lot of the conversations within the book, the things that I really enjoyed, talked about the prejudice against the robots, how they fit into society, how they sometimes pass as human or do not. And I like those concepts, but as a mystery, I found it really lacking. I have to be honest, I did not find it interesting at all. I really didn't care who was murdered. I didn't care who did it. And for the most part, I found this book to be not very memorable, which makes it a struggle to review here. So I'm not certain if I'm going to continue on with the rest of the robot detective books. I am very interested in reading the author's Foundation series, so I might just skip over to that unless you all tell me that the books get way better from here. So if you really like mystery stories, you actually might like this one a lot more than I did, because while it does have those sci-fi elements, for the most part it read like a really simple, straightforward mystery, and I just don't particularly love those books. So take it for what you will, try it for yourself if it's interesting, but I thought it was a little bit meh, for lack of a better descriptor. From there we have Zodiac by Neal Stephenson, and this is an eco-thriller that follows a protagonist who sees himself as a bit of an environmental superhero. So he lives in Boston where they are pouring toxic waste into the water, and he is a bit of a vigilante fighting against the corporate entities and all the other ones that are ruining the environment. And the story is him and his friends trying to take the man down, save the world, and all of that. But oh my goodness, this book is really fun. First, I need to say that the protagonist is one of the most obnoxious, annoying people I have ever read in a book, and I'm certain that's done on purpose. So I can read an unlikable character as long as the author knows their character is unlikable, which I'm sure is the case here. But he actually was a fantastic protagonist. The whole book is told from his perspective, and in a lot of ways this book reads like one long monologue through his voice and consciousness. He is constantly going on and on about these ideas, and I got to listen to the audiobook narration, which I really recommend, because I will say Stephenson has a really great rhythm to some of his books. This one was just very tight, and you got to really hear the nice pacing. The way everything is described is so well done, and I really think you'll get the best appreciation for the prose if you do the audiobook version. And I do have to of course mention, given the topic, you have to be very pro-environmental issues, or at least okay reading an entire book on the topic, because at times, yes, it can get pretty preachy, and it's just one long discussion about environmentalism. So if you're one of those people who is turned off by the topic, if you don't believe in global warming, this book might set you off. But I personally really enjoyed it for the most part. At times I felt like the actual plot was a little bit flimsy or whatnot, but it's definitely a book I'd revisit. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I would recommend it. It's just a very unique book. It's very adult, and just be prepared for lots of swearing and just a lot of humor. And yeah, if that sounds good to you, I definitely encourage you to try it for yourself. Then for fantasy, we have Mage's Blood by J.R.R, and this is the first book in the Moontide Quartet. This is set in a secondary world, so not our own, but technically sort of. We'll get into that. And it follows multiple points of view. And in this world, there are two continents that are connected sometimes by a bridge. However, most of the time, this bridge is underwater. However, every 12 years, the tide gets low enough that the bridge is exposed, and at which case the two nations go to war. And so this story is told, as I mentioned, from multiple points of view, and you get to see how the different people in the different continents live and just the different issues. This first book is spent in the months leading up to the Moontide, and so it is definitely a building book. And there's things I liked about it. First, the magic is really interesting. There are mages, and you find out that their level of power is very much based off the purity of their mage's blood. So if a mage and a mage have a child, they will have a pureblood child, which will then have stronger powers than someone who then goes off and marries someone who has no magical abilities. And so I really like the concept. At the beginning of the story, we start in a magic school, which I love, so you get a really good explanation about how the different magic works, and I did enjoy that. What I struggled with was a few things, one being the characters. I didn't find them to be the most developed, and I didn't always believe their motivations, which was a big struggle for me. Also, because of the fact that so much of the magic involves the purity of their blood, you get into a lot of conversations about fertility and pregnancy and birth, which are not topics that I enjoy reading about. So that is just a personal issue of mine. But overall, my biggest complaint with this book is that the world building felt lazy to me, because they took a version of our world, and the author just kind of mixed up how the different nations existed. So they're in different places with slightly different names, but they're very, very close to the real names of real places in the real world. And while I can appreciate other books that take inspiration from real life, like certainly I've read fantasy that involves ancient China or East India, but this book just took everything and mixed up together. It was not on voices, and at times just felt like it was executed very poorly. So I'll be honest, I probably should DNF this book. I don't plan on continuing the series and was overall really disappointed. And finally, let's talk about the series that I am oh so proud to have finished, and that is The Lord of the Rings, ending with The Return of the King. I talked about the series in a previous video, but I wasn't done the last book when I mentioned it. So yes, now I am done, and for the most part, I enjoyed it. So in this last book, you have the Battle of Gondor, and I'll be honest, it's just not part of the story that I found to be the most interesting, but I love the middle section, particularly with Frodo and Sam in the lands of Mordor. The characters and relationships, and there was some amazing back and forth, and it was just so powerful, so emotional. Absolutely love that middle section, but I was really surprised by how early the climax came, and then there was like one long epilogue, so you get all of these ending moments, and it just felt to be very drawn out. And I do have to acknowledge that I think I'm just a little bit spoiled from reading so much modern fantasy, where I think there is a lot of pressure to have really strong narrative drive throughout a book series. And so I just found this one to be kind of weirdly paced, not just this book, but the whole series. And so I did struggle at times with it, but overall, I am really happy that I read this series. And while it was not a perfect read through for me, I don't know whether or not I'd consider this to be a favorite, because I didn't give any of the books higher than 4 stars, but I could see myself rereading the series and loving it even more the second time around or the third time. Again, I said I love the movie, so I do love the overall story, but the way the original material was put together, again, like the pacing, the narrative, all of that, it just wasn't quite perfect for me, but I think it could become perfect with the nostalgia of revisiting the series. So overall, good things to say. I know this is a lot of people's all-time favorite, and I definitely see why. I appreciate it so much, and for the most part, I'm really happy I took the time to invest to go through these. I never thought I'd get through this series, and I'm so happy to consider it a completed series that I can add to my shelves. So that is really exciting for me. So that is it. We've made it to the end of the video here. I would love to hear down below of the books I talked about. Are there any that you're planning on checking out for yourself? And also let me know what is a series or standalone book that you conquered this year that you're really proud to have done. If you're new to my channel, consider subscribing. I do read adult science fiction and fantasy, not really any young adult. And I also read some horror and thrillers along the way. And if you are already a subscriber, thank you so much. You can still help me out by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing it around online, and if you hit that little notification button, you'll never miss a video from me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.